Thank you so much for joining us online here at Fam Church. Now, just a reminder, there are two ways for you to stay connected with us here at Fam Church. You can go out to myfamchurch.com or head over to Facebook at facebook.com/famchurch and give us a like. There you will get all of your event information and news from us here at Fam Church. And now, our series, #thestruggleisreal, and our lead pastor, Brian Lane.
And good morning once again, and welcome to Fam Church. My name is Brian. I am the lead pastor here, and we are excited that you are with us in this second week of our message series, #thestruggleisreal. And maybe you're saying to yourself, this is my first time here. What are you all about? Well, Fam Church is here to reach the community of Mulberry, okay? We are here to lead people of all backgrounds here in this city and the surrounding areas to become fully devoted followers of Jesus. It's our goal, it's our passion, it's our heart to reach this area because we know here that our only hope, the only way we have hope is found in Jesus. And for Fam Church, we hope that us being here in this community makes an eternal difference in people's lives. And if you are here as a first-time guest with us this morning, we hope that your experience has been amazing. And if you're in church for the first time or a first time in a long time and you're saying to yourself, I'm not even a Christian, I'm not even sure what I'm doing here, don't worry, we've got something for you. I believe that this message is applicable to your life, and we believe that God has something for you today from that. And we hope that all of you've experienced this morning will help grow you closer in your relationship and your walk with Jesus. You'll be closer to him than you ever have before. And so we're continuing this message series, #thestruggleisreal. And it's not a complete message or a title unless you have the hashtag on it. But our goal and our point in this series is to discuss some of the things that people are struggling with in this world. Struggling with in their homes, with their families, in their workplaces, and in just life in general. And we're covering topics such as why do bad things happen to people, and what about ISIS and craziness in the world, terrorism, war, and we're going to talk about even the struggle of following Jesus in a world that's going in the opposite direction in one of these weeks. And these are the things that we're going to talk about. Well, we're not just going to talk about them. We're not just going to look at a problem and try and devise solutions, but what we are going to do is we're going to look at the problem and then look in to see what Jesus has said, to look in to see what God has said in regards to those situations and circumstances, so that we can have a solution that is complete, that is whole, that is not lacking, because that's what Jesus gives us in his solutions. And if you weren't here last week when we started this, our first message was on finances. If you missed it, you can go to our webpage, myfamchurch.com, click on the media tab, and there'll be a button there that says The Struggle is Real. Click on that, and you can get to last week's message because it had some really good practical stuff and helpful tips about finances. Okay, and so today's struggle is more than just about us and the things that we struggle with. This is a kind of a condition of the world in general that impacts everybody who's a part of this society, you know? And all you have to do is take out your phone or go to your tablet and open up your CNN app on that thing and start reading some of the news stories, and you realize that the world seems to just be losing its ever-loving mind, doesn't it? I mean, you look at things and you just go to yourself, could it get any crazier? I mean, when you look at the world right now, we have 28 armed conflicts going on around the world, 28 of them, okay? But it's more than just armed I mean, you got Russian jets bombing Syria. You got Saudi Arabian jets bombing Iran. You've got all of these things going on. Then I opened my app this week, and on Monday morning, I think it was, or maybe it was Tuesday morning, but I saw in there the headline on CNN was, North Korea has developed thermonuclear weapons, the H-bomb. And I was thinking to myself, for the love, and if you don't know what that is, a thermonuclear device is 10 times more powerful than the devices that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which North Korea already had. The thermonuclear devices are the ones that can take out vast more people, way more quantities of cities, all of that sort of stuff. And so I was thinking to myself, are you crazy? This man has thermonuclear weapons? I mean, really, and what was funny about that is I read that Tuesday morning. Monday night, I had a dream, and the dream was that a nuclear missile hit Mulberry, okay? I have no idea why. I just remember sitting there looking up at the sky and seeing this missile and saying, is that going to hit here? Yeah, that's going to hit here. I saw the explosion and I was vaporized. I mean, literally, that was my dream. Okay, it was crazy. And so when I woke up the next morning and saw this headline, I said to myself, God must be telling me something. We're about to get our city nuked. No, I don't think that's what he was saying with that. But and all of us have heard of the things that is going on with ISIS in Syria and other places in the Middle East, but they've left there and they've exported their craziness to Paris and California. And if you were paying attention to the news at all this week, a Baltimore police officer was attacked in his cruiser by a man claiming allegiance to ISIS. He stuck a gun in the man's cop car and fired 13 shots and said it was in the name of ISIS. Fortunately, the cop survived, but it's just like, what on earth is going on in this world? And then we just hear of the church shootings in Charleston and other crazy things that are going on like that, and then we just say to ourselves, what on earth? But it's even more than that, isn't it? I mean, there are people that are afraid that every time they step out of their house, something wild and crazy is going to happen. Every time they get in their car, they think that driving to the mall, somehow they're going to die in a fiery crash. Or if they let their kids out of their sight for 1 minute, that their kids are going to be kidnapped and they're never going to see them again. I mean, really, this is a fear. I remember when my kids were younger, I got lectured by a parent. Here's what I had done, okay? My kids were at this elementary school in Ocala, and this elementary school had the longest car line ever. I don't understand why it took 45 minutes for people to get through this stupid line. And it was insane. And so finally, somebody said to me, hey, you don't have to sit in the car line. What you can do is sign your kids up to walk home, even though they couldn't walk home because we lived too far away, and just meet them at the edge of the campus. They walk across campus, you meet them, and then you go home, you get in your car. And so I said, okay, that's a great idea. And so there was a side street on the side of the elementary school, and so I parked over there. My kids would be released right up here, and they would walk from here over to where my car was at. Okay, they never left the school grounds until they hit the street. By the time they hit the street, I was there. Okay, and I could see them coming all the way across the grass. However, I had one parent at our church pull me aside and say, you are an idiot. And I was like, why am I an idiot? You are letting your kids walk by themselves from the front of the school to the street. They're going to get kidnapped. They're going to get taken. Something crazy is going to happen. And I'm sitting there going, how on earth is that going to happen? Is some crazy person just going to drive his van, come crashing through the school, and jump out and take them and run? I mean, there's kids walking everywhere. They'd be far easier to take than mine. But this parent was absolutely convinced I was putting my kids' lives at risk for allowing them to walk by themselves across the campus. And I still haven't been able to figure out where the risk was at in that. I mean, I just got to be honest with you. But we live in fear. We live in fear of all of these things. I mean, we live in fear of a gunman. I remember the night that Star Wars The Force Awakens opened and I was at the theaters. Somebody told me I was stupid for going to see the movie. You want to know why? Because it was a target and some gunman could walk in there and shoot and kill me. I'm sitting there saying, we just live in a society where people live in fear. And I wish that I could stand up here and say that this is few and far between, and it's generally people outside of the church, outside of Jesus, who live in this fear. But can I tell you what? It's the norm now. And what's scary is more people inside the church live in fear of those things happening than those outside of the church. It's become something in the church where we have got this idea in our heads that God has put us here to have a safe life. And so we've got to do everything we can to protect that safe life. But that's not what God has put us here at all for. And that's the struggle we're going to look at this morning in The Struggle is Real. All right, the place I would like to start today, it's this, is that God is not surprised by the things that are going on in the world, okay? And to do that, we're going to read in the book of Luke. We're going to be in chapter 21. If you don't know where the book of Luke is at, it's the third book in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke. If you're saying to yourself, I don't even know where the New Testament's at, that's all right. We're going to put it on the screen behind me so that you can follow along with the words on the screen. And if you're here this morning and you do not have a Bible, and you would like a Bible, stop by Fam Connections outside in our lobby after service, and they will put a brand new Bible in your hands so that you can have one to read. All right, but before we begin this reading this section of Scripture, we're going to read a lot this morning. But before we begin that, let me give you a little bit of background about who this guy Luke is, because we were in Luke last week, but we never really talked about who this guy Luke is. And Luke, this is what we know about Luke. Okay, he was probably a Gentile, which means is that he does not have any Jewish lineage in his family, okay? He was born outside of the Jewish world. He had non-Jewish parents. All of the other writers in the New Testament, they all have some sort of Jewish background. Even Mark, he had a Gentile father, but his mother was Jewish, okay? And so he is the only one of our writers in the New Testament that does not have a Jewish background. Okay, and so some people, and so because of that, when people ask me, where should I start reading the Bible? I tell them to start in Luke. You know why? Because we're all Gentiles. He's written more to us than to other people. And so it's better, it's easier, it's more helpful for us to understand what the text is saying because of the audience and the background that he has. But here he was well educated. Okay, he was a physician by training. He was a doctor. He was a medical doctor. And he was a traveling companion of Paul's. He was a guy. Paul was the guy who wrote a good chunk of the New Testament that we have. But Luke traveled with him from his second missionary journey all the way to his Paul's arrest and imprisonment in Rome. And if you want to read about Paul and Luke and their adventures, it's found in the book of Acts in the New Testament, starting in chapter 16, and it goes all the way to the end of that book. But this book that we're going to look at this morning, Luke, was basically a research paper that Luke did on the life of Jesus, because Luke, not having been around when Jesus was alive, wanted to be sure of the things he believed and was teaching other people, so he went and did research. And I mean, this is what it says in Luke 1, verses 1 through 4. You don't need to turn there. I'm just going to read it to you. This is what it says. It says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. So Luke was just writing this book as a research paper to be sure of the things that he was teaching. And so with that, let's turn to Luke chapter 21. We're going to read verses 5 through 36. And the only reason we're reading all of this is because I want you to get the full scope of what Jesus was saying here. And so this is what he says. This is what Jesus says in Luke 21, starting in verse 5. He says, some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, as for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down. Teacher, they asked, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place? He replied, watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away. He said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison, and you will be brought before kings and governors, all on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me, but make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you the words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by your parents, brothers, sisters, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. Stand firm, and you will win life. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that this desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it would be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There will be signs in the sun and moon and stars on the earth. Nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world. For the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. He told them this parable: look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourself and know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life, and that day will close in on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come on all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. All right. So after saying all that, here's the information to help make this text make sense to us, okay? This was a time in history that was called the Pax Romana. I tried practicing saying that, and I keep saying it wrong. And what this meant was, it was the time of the peace of Rome. Okay? This was a unique time in history where Rome had conquered the known world and brought peace and stability to it. See, up before Rome had come, since about 800 BC, when the Assyrian Empire had risen and become a great empire, there had been constant wars, there had been constant battles, there had been constant fights between these empires that were jostling for power. And then within those empires, there were people, there was people groups, there was nationalities, there was cities that would look at what was going on. They wouldn't like this national power, this superpower that was ruling over them. And so what they would do is they would rebel. And so all of these empires had just times of brutal and bloody rebellion. But Rome had come along. And for the first time in history, you could travel between North Africa, the Mediterranean, in Europe, in relative peace and safety. It was secure. You were able to do it. You were able to get out there and travel without having to worry about things happening to you. And because of that, trade increased and people were making money. There was a lot of money going around at the time. The general population was actually getting wealthier because of the security that Rome brought. And really, many people thought that this is what the pinnacle of life was meant to be. There was peace, so they didn't have to worry about being drafted into an army. There was security. They didn't have to worry much about their personal as well as their family security. And there was financial prosperity, a great combination for any country or government. And the general population was totally with it. This doesn't mean that there wasn't dissent and problems in the Roman Empire, but the thought was that this empire was going to bring peace and security that was going to last for 1,000 years. And so in this environment, in steps Jesus, and he says these words that we just read there. He was basically saying to him, you think it's safe, you think it's secure, but guess what? It's not going to be that way. It's not always going to be that way. There's going to be things that are going to happen that are going to blow your mind. Okay, things are going to get crazy. The earth is going to get wild. People are going to even look at the water, the tossing of the sea, and say, is somebody coming to attack me because of the turbulence of the ocean? There's going to be signs in the stars and the moons and the heaven above. There's going to be crazy, unexpected things going on, and it's going to shake the world to its core. Hearts are going to be weighted down, and circumstances of life are going to crush people. Jesus said it's going to happen. And when you listen to that description and compare it to the state of the world today, it sounds eerily similar, doesn't it? Even in recent history. I mean, if you were alive, if you can remember the mid to late 1980s and the early 1990s, some crazy stuff had happened in the world. Communism had fallen. Russia had been, the great Soviet Union had been disassembled, and suddenly the United States was kind of the only superpower left in the world, and there was great peace, and there was prosperity flowing everywhere, and people actually thought that the late 80s and early 90s were going to be how the world was going to continue from then on, because everything was so good, and the world was just, in love with the world, and we were having a good time, and, the United States was going to usher in this new Pax Romana, where there was going to be peace, where there was going to be prosperity, where there was going to be great things going on. But it only took a few years after that. Suddenly you got a crazy guy in North Korea. You've got Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and terrorist bombings happening all over the world. You've got rogue and unstable nations getting nuclear weapons. You've got planes flying into the World Trade Center, economic collapse on a scale not seen in a long time. Crazy times and violence against people not seen before, or at least not seen in a really long time. And as we went through it, many people's minds had a hard time wrapping around this. It didn't make sense. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. You see, history had changed. God was supposed to be giving us peace. And so it seemed like God didn't know what he was doing. And the first thing that we need to know in our struggle against this fear of what the world is, of what the world has become, is that Jesus, God, knew this was going to happen, and it didn't catch him by surprise. See, the reason Jesus said something to his followers, and those words were written down and recorded for us to read here 2,000 years later, was because Jesus wanted us to know that what's going on was going to happen. He knew it was going to happen. It didn't catch him by surprise. He hasn't lost control of this planet. It is still going in the direction that he knew it would go. And the thing is, he is in total control of what's going on in this world. And I feel I have to explain what I mean by that, because different people will take this different ways. But what I mean by total control is that he, God, knows all that is happening before it happens. But that doesn't mean he is orchestrating everything and every detail of this world. I mean, we have to understand that distinction, just because God knew that a couple was going to walk into an office in San Bernardino and kill a bunch of people doesn't mean that he planned and orchestrated it for it to happen. It wasn't like God was speaking to him and saying, hey, buddy, you need to go and do this. Okay, see, God gave us something. He gave us something called a free will. And unfortunately, he lets that operate in this world. But see, he had one of two choices. He could either make robots that served him and loved him and followed him, or he could make people that freely choose to follow and love him. And he decided that having someone freely say yes to him was a far better option than robots who just blindly followed after him. But here's the deal. When that happens, things get crazy. When we're allowed free will, things get a little bit wild and things get out of control. And sometimes people do things that God doesn't want them to do. Now, we're going to talk about, on January 24th, bad things happening. And so I don't want to go too much further down this road in talking about this. So if you want to go deeper in that, mark your calendars. Be here January 24th for that message. But God knew what was going to happen. God had it under control. He knows what's going on. He hasn't lost control of the world. That's the first thing. Okay? And the second thing I will say, and because God knows those events, we do not have to fear those events. Okay, and to look at this, we're going to turn to Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And this is what it says in Mark 4. It says, on that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There was also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He then said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? They were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. So here's what's going on in this story. All right, Jesus and his disciples, they had been out ministering in the countryside, and they were going around there praying for people. They were going around and they were casting demons. I mean, all the stuff that you see in the New Testament that Jesus was doing, he was doing it. And he said to his disciples, you know what? Let's not stay where we're at. Let's cross over the lake. And so they went and they got in this boat and they sailed across this lake because they were going to minister to the people who were on the other side of the lake. And so that's what was going on here in the story. And then a storm comes up. Have you ever been in a really bad storm? I mean, how many of you went through the hurricanes of 2004 here? I mean, there were pretty crazy hurricanes, right? Well, that wasn't the craziest. We weren't here in 2004. But the craziest thing I've ever been through with a storm was I was on a school bus in a tornado, okay? And here's how it played out, okay? I was in kindergarten, okay? And the whole bus was filled with kindergartners. And we get out of school, it's like, I can't remember, it's like 2:15 in the afternoon, and we walk outside, and it was literally as dark as night outside, okay? And our teacher just starts getting kids on the bus. Get on the bus. There's lightning flashing across the sky, and it's pitch black, and they're just shoving kids on the bus, and they're telling drivers, go, 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 get out of here, okay? And so all of these buses, they just take off. They loaded them up as fast as they could and took off. Well, within a matter of minutes of pulling away from the school, suddenly the storm hit. We had hail coming down, and if you can imagine sitting inside of an aluminum tube with hail beating on it, it was pretty loud. Okay? Then you had the thunder, and the lightning and the thunder shaking the bus, and you had sheets of rain coming down, and not to mention the 200 or 100-mile-an-hour winds that were throwing debris against the side of the bus. Okay, everybody on this bus was freaked out. All of us kids were scared to death. Most of the kids on the bus were crying because it was very stressful. Okay? Well, about 15 minutes into this trip, as they're trying to get us home through this tornado, our bus hits a puddle. There's an intersection that's flooded out, and we stall out in the storm. We are sitting there in an intersection with our bus literally rocking back and forth like this from the wind, debris hitting it, hail hitting it, rain hitting it. I mean, it was one of the craziest half hours I have ever been in my life. I swore I was going to die. I can remember it vividly now, even though it happened like 40 years ago, okay? And it was an incredible thing. I mean, the only other time in my life I've ever thought I was going to die were always on airplanes. I've never had that experience on the surface of the earth except in this one instance. And here the disciples are in a similar situation. They're out on the lake. They're sitting on the lake, and suddenly the storm blows up out of nowhere. And what we got to know about this is that there were 3 guys on the boat who had lots of experience with this. There was a guy named Peter, there was a guy named John, and there was a guy named James. All 3 of them were professional fishermen. They had fished that lake their entire life. Here they were out fishing. They'd fished and fished and fished. I'm sure they'd seen many storms come up and blow across this lake. But suddenly, this one blows up, and even our 3 professional fishermen who have probably seen it all before are in a panic. They're scared. It even caused them to question whether or not they were going to make it. They were so terrified they were going to die that they even got mad at Jesus. Why did they get mad at Jesus? Because when all of this was going on, he was asleep at the back of the boat. And they had to go wake him up, all right? I mean, this bum couldn't even get out of bed to do anything to keep them from dying. But see, what's crazier about this is when Jesus gets woken up, he's not exactly happy about being woken up, okay? He didn't say, hey, what's up, guys? What can I do for you? They wake him up. Jesus gets up, says, shut up, stop, and the wind and the waves stop. Then he turns to all of them and says, what's your problem? Why don't you have faith? I mean, do you know anybody like that? Maybe you're like that. Somebody wakes you up and you're really cranky. Do we have any really cranky waker-uppers in here? Yeah, generally I'm not, unless the dog wakes me up at 2 o'clock in the morning, then I'm ready to give anybody a dog, okay? That's just the way it is. And so Jesus is here, rebukes them for having little faith. But it was because the reason he rebuked them was because of everything that he'd already told them. You see, Jesus had told them that he was the Son of God. He'd also been telling them that there was a plan God had for his life, a very specific plan. This plan was he was going to be handed over to the Jewish leaders, and he was going to end up being executed, dying for Jesus, or dying for us. And so Jesus is saying, what is your problem? We're not going to die here on the lake. I already told you when I'm going to die. Why are you freaking out? Why are you in a panic? Why are you going crazy? You don't need to fear. I'm here. I'm there by your side. God has a plan for me, and there's nothing to fear regardless of what's going on. And as we read that story, I think all of ourselves can see ourselves in that story of being afraid of situations in life, just like the disciples were. We can look at the situation in the world right now and say, I get their response because that's where I'm at. But we would say they shouldn't have been afraid because they had Jesus right next to them, right? I've got a right to be afraid right now because Jesus isn't right next to me. Jesus isn't sitting in the boat. My fear is justified. Well, listen to this. If you're a follower of Jesus, he's right by your side. Doesn't matter where you're at, what's going on, he is right by your side. He tells us that in many places in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. And second, I think that Jesus would say the same thing to us as he was trying to communicate to his disciples in the boat. I'm by your side. I have a plan. My plan is going to happen regardless of what is going on in this crazy world, so you don't have to fear. You know what God says about fear? God says only one thing about fear in the Bible. Only one thing we should fear. He tells us that we should fear him and him only. Guess what? There's 365 verses in the Old Testament and New Testament that tell us, do not fear. Can you think of any other 365s that are out there, just off the top of your head? Like maybe there's 365 days in a year. I know there's a leap year this year, so you're allowed one day to fear this year. But there's 365 different times in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, God or Jesus says, do not fear. See, he's trying to make a point. There is no reason to fear. He's got it all under control. It's in his hands. He's going to take care of it. And I think, though, because he tells us 365 times, do not fear, I also think we got to understand that when we fear, we're kind of sinning, okay? We're not kind of sinning, we are sinning. Because God has said we are not to fear. And so if he said it 365 times, it's important. And when we don't do it, it's sin. And I know we don't like to hear that, but that's the way it is. Now, when I say fear God, I'm not talking that you need to hide in a corner because at any minute he can and might destroy you. This fear of God is a respect, a reverence of his power and might, knowing that he's in control of everything, but that he loves us beyond our comprehension. And because of that, he has our best at heart. And I just want to, kind of in closing and wrapping this whole thing up, I want to look at Job in the end of it, in the end of this whole thing, to show you what power fear has and what fear can do in someone's life. And the book of Job, it's the oldest book in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament, right before Psalms. And when you leave today, you can check it out. We're not going to read or go through the whole thing, but he was a very wealthy man. He had lots of livestock. He had servants. He had money. He had houses. He had children. He had crops. He had health. He had everything that you could want to make yourself wealthy. But through a series of events, everything that he had was taken from him. He lost everything except the house that he lived in and his wife. And I think that if he would have gone to Job, he would have said, God, why didn't you take my wife too? Because she was not very much of a help to him. Okay, she just kept telling him, curse God so you can die. Okay? If that's the advice, women, you're giving your husbands, we need to talk. All right? But so everything falls apart on Job. And after everything falls apart, Job makes this statement in Job chapter 3, verse 25. He says this, what I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. See, Job was afraid. Job was afraid he was going to lose everything, and exactly what he feared came upon him. See, in areas, Job had trust in God, but in some other areas, Job had no trust for God. He had no trust that God was in control, that God had his back, that God had his hand upon his life, and he was going to do something. And Satan exploited that. He used it to get in and really take Job down a notch or 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 or 50. I mean, all the stuff that he lost, pretty wild. And then on top of it, in the midst of all of this, losing everything, he gave Job his wife, who kept telling him to die. And then he gave him 3 friends that kept telling him, it's your fault, Job. You did something, you're wrong. And so it was just piling on top of Job, all of the guilt, all of the fear, all of that stuff. Fortunately for Job, he didn't walk away from God, which is many people's response in that situation. But Satan still operates in the same way. He'll still come to us knowing our fears, and he will come in and he will put those fears in front of us, and he will tell you, God doesn't care about you. God doesn't have a plan for you. The things that are going on in your life, God knows that they're happening, and he's sitting up in heaven and he's laughing at you while you're going through all of this. And we'll listen to him feed us that stuff. It'll just capitalize on these fears that we have inside of us, and it'll destroy our walk and our relationship with God. He'll fill our hearts with fears of terrorists walking into the mall and killing people. He'll fill our hearts with fear of something happening to our families as they make a long drive. He'll fill our hearts with fear about anything. And then quickly point out it's God's fault. So if we don't put our fears in check, if we don't allow Jesus to speak those words over us, that he has a plan, he is there by our side, and his plan is going to happen, and his plan is good, we could end up getting destroyed by our fears. That's not where God wants you or me to be at. He wants us to live our life not fearful of anything, except for missing out on God's plans, God's purposes, God's goal and hope for our life. So Lewis, if you could come on back up. Does that mean that none of those things that we listed will happen to us then if we don't have fear? No. I hate to say this, but some of us may still die in a terrorist attack, no matter how little fear we have in our lives. You may still see something tragic happen to one of your family members. You may even lose everything like Job. But see, if we have our fear in the right place, if our fear is centered on Jesus, if our fear is centered on God, we will have a full grasp that Jesus loves us, and the plans, the purposes that he has for us come from the heart of a God that really cares. And because he really cares, there's nothing to fear when we enter into those. We can walk in faith, knowing that the wind, knowing that the waves, knowing that the storm, knowing that all of those things that are pounding against us and beating against our life and causing us to be in fear can do nothing to sink us. Even if our boat is taking on water like the disciples had when they were crossing the lake, he's there and he's going to keep it afloat. God knows what he's doing, and as long as we trust and believe in that, we're going to be able to get rid of the power that fears have in our life. Don't let the fear of what might happen ruin you. Don't let the fear of events that are beyond your control consume you. Instead, let the fear of the Lord be your anchor. Fear God. Realize he's got your best in mind and that he's going to take care of you and carry you through any situation, any circumstance, anything that you're facing. Because he has your best in mind and he loves you beyond anything you can comprehend. Beyond anything you can comprehend. I know that you think, well, I wouldn't let my family go through this, and he's letting me go through stuff like this, and so he doesn't love me. That's what we're going to answer on January 24th. But don't let your fears consume you. Let's pray.